Wake up!
I want to say something about this Helen Thomas controversy. I've been watching the mainstream media coverage of the situation for the past week or so in absolute disgust. In case you don't know what I'm talking about, Helen Thomas is a now former member of the White House press corps. She's an 89-year-old woman. She's got decades in the journalism game. And she was a highly respected journalist until last week. She was asked her opinion on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and her response was this.
Tell them to get the hell out of Palestine.
Ooh. Any better comments than that?
Helen is one. Remember, these people are occupied, and it's their land. It's not German, it's not Poland.
So where should they go? What should they do?
They go home.
Where's the home?
Poland.
So the Jews,
Germany.
The Jews go back to Poland and Germany.
And America and everywhere else. Why push people out of there who have lived there for centuries?
Now that didn't sound good, I'll admit that. But what is strange to me is that in the midst of the Israeli Navy having killed 9 peace activists, several of those having been apparently executed, and in the midst of the Israeli Navy having shot 30 additional peace activists, and in the midst of Israel having killed, at my last count, 5 additional Palestinians over the past week or so, in the midst of all of that, the mainstream media is absolutely obsessed with these basically harmless statements that Helen Thomas made. And I so wish she hadn't apologized, and I hope that she'll go on writing maybe for like one of the more reliable and ethical sources of information, particularly here online. The media has portrayed her statements as ideas unheard of, and they could only exist in the mind of someone who is not objective, not informed, not completely sane, or all of the above. Now, she's been called a Nazi, an anti-Semite, and a Jew hater. Now, this is profoundly confusing to me because even if Helen Thomas does believe that Jews should go back to wherever, this does not say that Helen Thomas hates Jews. The most that can be drawn from that statement is that maybe Helen Thomas is anti-Zionism. But to many people, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are one and the same. These people are very wrong. Zionism is a political movement. I repeat, a political movement, not a religious movement, but a political movement based on the belief that the Jews are entitled to a national homeland, that national homeland being the land of Israel, or some would say the land of Palestine. Now, opposition to Zionism is a position held by people all over the world, including hundreds of thousands of Jews. I've cut together some excerpts from a few speeches regarding Judaism versus Zionism and the origin of Zionism and the state of Israel that I want you guys to check out.
The first organizational conference of Zionism, if my memory serves me correctly, was in 1897 in a place called Valls, Switzerland. V-A-L-S-E. The reason why this meeting had to be held in Valls, Switzerland was because the majority of Orthodox Jewry in Europe was against Zionism, totally against it. We must look properly at Zionism, its beginning, and its founder, a man by the name of Theodor Herzl, H-E-R-Z-L. Mr. Herzl was, of course, bourgeois from his toes to his top of his head. He was bourgeois. As bourgeois as you can get. He didn't think about the proletarian. As a matter of fact, Mr. Herzl himself was not a religious person. It's extremely important. And we want to read his diary. He himself says that he's an atheist. You must understand the word properly. An atheist does not just not believe in God. An atheist makes the affirmative statement that God does not exist. Thus, Mr. Herzl is an atheist.
Let me just give you a quotation, a famous quotation from Theodor Herzl, who was the man who formalized Zionism in its political shape. In other words, there are many kinds of Zionists in the late 19th century. Herzl gave it its definitive form that led to the statehood of the State of Israel, okay, and hence called political Zionism. And in his diaries, he wrote once, he would never ever say this publicly, by the way, because he wrote once that we must, this is from 1895, this is in his diaries, we must expropriate gently the private property on the state assigned to us. We shall try to spirit the penniless population across the border by procuring employment for it in the transit countries, while denying it employment in our own country. The property owners will come over to our side. Both the process of expropriation and the removal of the poor must be carried out discreetly and circumspectly. Let the owners of the immovable property believe that they are cheating us, selling us things for more than they are worth, but we are not going to sell them anything back. Now, 1895, what Herzl is saying is frankly admitting to himself the necessity for a policy of what is now called ethnic cleansing.
Every single one of the Zionist leaders who extracted the promise from Balfour were European, atheistic Zionists. Not one of them claimed a biblical title. Not one of them believed in God. What they were doing was exactly what white people who were not Jewish were doing all over the world at that time. They were founding a colonial settlement.
I could never understand, until this day it is incomprehensible for me to understand. How is it that Zionism, a political philosophy, born thousands of miles away from Judaism, one born in Africa, the other in Europe, born thousands of years different from Africa, thousands of years of difference, Judaism thousands of years ago, Zionism 1897, and how is it that they can link each other together? And according to the philosophy of Zionism, that they feel that somehow that they have some relationship to Judaism and this promised state that God promised his chosen people. Mr. Herzl did not believe in God. Not only did not believe in God, he said that God did not exist. Now, he who tells me that God does not exist sets out to find a place that God promised to his chosen people. If this is not ludicrous, and this is the basis, of course, of Zionism, so you can see here the contradictions just everywhere.
Zionism must be created 100 years ago by atheists, people who abhorred religion, who wanted to transform Judaism from religion to nationality, to a purely materialistic base, godless in its essence. That is not Judaism, and they have no right to use the name of Israel. They've usurped our name, they've stolen our symbols, and they've stolen our identity. And they are causing death and destruction, year in and year out. For over 50 years, death and bloodshed has not stopped because of a pure ideological belief called Zionism. We are forbidden to oppress the Palestinian people and steal their houses. That is what Judaism says. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill. We have no right to the rule over the land of Palestine.
Palestinian people had only one main difficulty, and it wasn't that there were only 500,000 of them. Their main difficulty was that they were Arabs. They were people from a supposedly inferior civilization. And in Mr. Churchill's infamous words, when told that Zionism could not be allowed to colonize Palestine because the Palestinians were already living there, he said, "I don't accept that the dog has the right to the manger, however long it has lain there." That was the mentality behind the Zionist occupation of Palestine.
This is the time when Zionism comes to rise. Zionism comes to look for a state when everywhere else in the world is already dominated. But in order for Mr. Herzl to get a country for Zionists, what he did was to attach himself to imperialism, British imperialism in this case, quite specifically. Of course, as an African who suffered under the heels of British imperialism, I can have no love for it, and certainly I cannot love anyone who attaches themselves to it for the foundation of a state and then call this a liberation movement. Liberation movements fight against imperialism, not with it. Clearly here.
In part 2 of this video, I'm going to point out some other examples of character assassinations provoked by criticism of Israel.